The Megami Tensei franchise is full of demons, but the simple truth is that no matter how many they introduce, there are always going to be thousands of gods, cryptids, and other folklore that will never make the cut. A little while back, I covered 10 figures I'd love to see in SMT, and today, I'm following it up with 10 more. And kind of a funny side note, I was gonna include a Mabie on this list before it was officially confirmed for Vengeance. Like before, the only real rule I have is to limit myself to one figure from any particular pantheon. So with that out of the way, let's do this. Seeing as how I ended the last video talking about a figure from Polynesian folklore, I figured why not start this video by revisiting my homeland and taking a look at something a little bit different. The mo'o are shape-shifting lizards from Hawaiian mythology. If you've ever spent time on the islands, you've probably seen a lot of geckos, and it was a common belief that many of these geckos were actually transformed mo'o. The three most common forms these creatures took were geckos, humans, or giant monstrous lizards. It's also believed that most mo'o are female, and if this is starting to sound a little familiar to you, it's probably because the mo'o were likely the inspiration for the Pokemon Salazzle. And frankly, I think a weirdly sexualized humanoid lizard would be a fine way to have them in this franchise too. While I think the mo'o would work perfectly fine as a categorical demon like Pixie or Apsaris, there are actually several named mo'o in Hawaiian folklore, so if I had to pick one of those, I'd go with Mamala, who is renowned for her surfing skills. Hang 10, you shape-shifting gecko goddess. We don't see quite as much Lovecraftian horror in Megami Tensei as we used to. Sure, we see the occasional revival of beings in games like Persona 5 and D2, but there are so many more figures to choose from those texts that have never seen the light of day in the franchise, especially if you explore some of the expanded Lovecraftian mythos. If I could pick one thing to bring over, you'll understand why that's funny in a moment, it'd be Yomagn'tho. Yomagn'tho is known as that which relentlessly waits outside. It's a ball of fire that transforms into a large flaming pattern, and basically, it's just kind of a jerk who wants nothing more than to kill all humans. Why? No one actually knows, but that's what it wants to do. The only thing really stopping Yomagn'tho is that nobody has invited it into our dimension yet, and yeah, there's just something about that which I think would be really funny and work well with Megami Tensei's usual lore and frequent forays into alternate worlds. Whenever I put together these lists, I always try to come up with at least one figure that mixes things up a bit. Instead of a being from a common myth or obscure ghost story, why not have a demon based on something tangible from the real world? For example, Billiken is a demon based on a statue in Osaka, which itself was based on a statue/college mascot from St. Louis. So when I learned about the Corpus clock and its unique monster, the Chronophage, conceived by John C. Taylor, I thought, yeah, I could see this as a Megaten demon. The Corpus clock is a unique timepiece found at the University of Cambridge, and the grasshopper-like monster, the Chronophage, is also known as the Time Eater. The Chronophage's creepy mechanical movements as it eats away the seconds, never going backwards, is really cool and memorable, and I think it would just work really well as a demon. Oh, and as a fun extra little tie to Shin Megami Tensei, guess who first unveiled the Corpus clock back in 2008? Eat the rich is a commonly used phrase these days, but it actually dates back far more than we may realize. For the Yeongno, a monster from Korean theater, eating the rich is literally what this thing does. The Yeongno exists in a few Korean plays, and it looks like a long-nosed dragon-like being wearing a large cloak and carrying a wooden flute that it uses to alert people to its presence. If the Yeongno eats 100 rich people, it will be granted access to heaven, so when you're on your New Game Plus run and have millions upon millions of yen or maka, you may want to be a little extra careful before you try to negotiate with this thing. In my recent video on neglected Megaten demons, I brought up Seer, and said that one day I'd love to eventually see a Megaten game with all 72 demons of the Ars Goetia. Truthfully, far more of these demons than we may realize are already in the franchise, but might be relegated to Demi-Kids, Giten Megami Tensei, and there's one that's even in an SMT4 manga that supposedly was designed by Kaneko himself, and where the heck has this dude been? Anyway, there are still a handful of the 72 demons that aren't in the franchise at all yet, so that's what I want to look at. Specifically, Vual, A weird, hunched-over camel man with the power to spark love or friendship between people and tell his summoners the past, present, or future. Of course, like most of the Goetian demons, it's often unclear if you can actually trust them or not. Vual is the 47th spirit and would be a welcome figure if for no other reason than because he's a Goetian demon that we haven't seen yet. Much like the cinema logos from my last video, I often like to look into weird stories, particularly those centered around food. And while trying to learn about some obscure mythology from China, I discovered the Feng, which roughly translates as mound or lump, and sometimes goes by other names like Shiro, looks like meat, or Roshi, meat excrescence. This is a peculiar lump of meat with two big eyes, with its most notable feature being that its body grows back as fast as it's eaten. And as far as I can tell, that's it. It doesn't move, it doesn't eat, I'm not even sure if it reacts to being eaten. It's just a lump of meat-like substance with googly eyes. What's crazy is this peculiar little meat blob has been around for seemingly thousands of years, with it being referenced in stories as far back as 1 BCE, to it even being used as a symbol for the idea of lab-grown sustainable food. Oh yeah, and apparently a story from a few years ago where someone claimed to find one that had a nose and mouth that turned out to be a fleshlight. Look, I'm just saying, we've already got the black ooze based on pudding, and how can you have any pudding if you don't eat your meat? There are plenty of great ghost stories involving terrifying, powerful women in Megami Tensei, from Reiko Kashima to La Llorona, and you know you're always in for a good time when one of them shows up. One that I'd really love to see is an African ghost story common in Nigeria and Ghana known as Madame Koi Koi. The story supposedly goes that a beautiful teacher who was known for wearing red high heels was fired after being cruel and physically violent to students. On her way home after being fired, she was killed in an accident and vowed to haunt the school to get revenge on all students. Now she roams the halls, punishing students who break the rules or appear at the school when they're not supposed to be there. Her name comes from the sound of her red heels as they click and clack through the hallway. Megami Tensei is definitely lacking in African mythology, so I knew I wanted to include some in this video, and yeah, I'm a huge fan of ghost stories like this. Japan already has a lot of ghost stories involving schools, so I think Madame Koi Koi would be a natural fit. When I say the word Sri Lankan devil bird, does anything come to mind, besides a very obscure side character in the Venture Brothers? Longtime Megaten fans may automatically think of Garulu, the Sri Lankan demonification of Garuda, but the Sri Lankan devil bird, better known as the Ulama, is a common ghost story and cryptid in Sri Lankan folklore. The story goes that a man believed his wife was being unfaithful to him, and so he cooked their infant son into a curry and fed it to her. Upon learning the truth, she bolted from her home and ran out into the woods, where it was believed that her vengeful spirit turned into a bird that cries out like a human. While many ornithologists believe the human-like cry comes from the spot-bellied eagle owl, maybe, just maybe, it comes from the angry spirit of a woman scorned. Again, I'm a sucker for birds and ghost stories, and this one also involves curry. There aren't too many Sri Lankan myths in the franchise either, so I think this would be a great addition to an upcoming title. I'm a big fan of lake monsters. Almost any iconic body of water seems to have its own distinct monster. From Nessie to Champ to Ogopogo, there are tons of beasts to choose from. However, I've noticed a lot of lake monsters fall into a few repetitive categories. So many of them are serpents, big fish, or plesiosaur-like monsters. Instead, I want to take a look at El Cuero, which roughly translates as the leather. Named for it seemingly resembling an enormous flat piece of living cowhide with a body like a stingray with sharp barbs along the rim of its body and eerie tentacle-like eyes. This flat monster seems to hunt in Lago Lacar, a glacial lake in the Andes regions of Argentina. Not only did I fall in love with this creature for its unique biology compared to a lot of other lake monsters, but because a lot of artwork I found took the cowhide thing literally and gave it the black and white spots of a Holstein cow, which I think is the perfect blend of adorable yet terrifying that makes for a lot of my favorite demons in Megami Tensei. Alright, so normally when I do these videos, I may have one or two picks where I kinda cheat and go, oh, maybe include this demon too, and it's a sorta 2-for-1 deal. But how about a 12-for-1 sorta deal? Fans of the Divine Comedy may recall a specific subsection of demons in Dante's Inferno known as the Malebranche. While I think these figures would work just fine as a grouped entity, in fact, I remember in the early days of SMT5 news, quite a few people assumed that Demon was Malebranche. But there are 12 specific figures that the series could add individually if they wanted to spread it out a bit. From the leader of the bunch, Malakota, to Cagnazzo, the nasty dog, or the troublemaker, Scarmiglione, this is a potentially interesting batch of demons, and whether we got them one by one or just the Malebranche as a whole, I think they'd work as demonic forces in this franchise. Alright, and there you have it, 10 more figures throughout mythology that I'd love to see show up in Megami Tensei someday. Now how about all of you? Did any of these demons sound like good ideas? Are there any unique, obscure, or simply neglected figures that you think would be perfect for the franchise? Let me know in the comments below, and who knows, maybe I'll talk about some of your choices in a future video. Thanks for watching, please consider subscribing so you don't miss out on any future content, and until next time, take care.